Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Former CIA Director John Brennan has proven to be many things. He is dishonest, having lied to the American people multiple times while working as director of the CIA. He's irresponsible. He's accused his political opponents of treason, a death penalty offense, without offering any evidence at all. But above all, Brennan is vocal. For the past year, he has shouted his views on every possible political topic, as is his right. Well, giving his opinion is literally his job now, actually. He's a cable news pundit. Yesterday, the Trump administration finally revoked his security clearance. Now, why was John Brennan able to keep his top-secret clearance after leaving government in the first place? Do other MSNBC contributors have security clearances? If so, what national interest is served by that? And how did somebody so obviously limited intellectually get to be CIA director in the first place? Those are all valid questions. No one on the left even bothered to try to explain any of those things. Instead, they started yelling about how Brennan's rights were being violated.
He knows the Russian collusion angle, and that's what Trump is trying to silence.
Nixonian-type practices of trying to silence anyone who's willing to criticize this president.
The larger implication here is the jeopardy to our First Amendment rights, and by extension, others.
Hear that? The First Amendment. Because you really don't have freedom of speech unless you also have a top-secret government security clearance. Brennan, of course, agreed with that. He wrote a piece claiming that Trump revoked his clearance, quote, to try to silence anyone who would dare challenge him. Where was Brennan's essay about being silenced published? Well, in the New York Times, a newspaper with 3 million subscribers. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what it looks like to be muzzled. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, who not only is a fake war hero, but also a graduate of Yale Law School, argued that Brennan somehow has a constitutional right to a security clearance. Notice how Blumenthal keeps a straight face as he says this. Watch.
It is not only an abuse of power, it is illegal. When the founders of our great nation decided on the First Amendment, it was because the King of England would retaliate against his critics. He has the authority to do a lot of things, but not in a way that violates the law.
Thanks for the lesson on the law, Senator. So here's the takeaway. John Brennan has a constitutional right to a federal security clearance, though he does not work for the federal government. You do not have that right. Neither do I, or anyone you know. Only John Brennan has that right because he resides in a special class of elites that you are obligated to obey. And by the way, if you disagree with any of that, you are a monster. You are on the side of bloodthirsty dictators like Stalin and Pol Pot. Watch as more dumb people talk.
What we're seeing today is this is what dictators do. This is a dictatorial exercise of power that should frighten.
It's a clear abuse of power, and it's a mark of an authoritarian dictator.
This is a striking move towards authoritarianism. You know, this is what dictators do. They shut down the press, they shut down dissent, they jail their opponents.
So he's a dictator. Let that settle in for a minute. If Trump is a dictator, he may be the single most incompetent dictator in world history. For example, he lets all these morons go on cable television and accuse him of crimes, but doesn't do anything about it. They keep talking. Somebody had better alert the secret police. But wait, the secret police are busy right now. They're watching MSNBC and nodding along in agreement. It's that kind of dictatorship. A looser, more Mediterranean version where no one actually gets repressed. Of course, if you're looking for a more Germanic style of authoritarianism, we have that too in the United States. But it's not in the White House. It's in Silicon Valley, which is happy to prevent you from expressing your views in public if they disagree with those views. That's everywhere these days. And yet, amazingly, somehow, the champions of speech you just watched, First Amendment absolutists like Senator Blumenthal, who learned the value of the Constitution while pretending to serve in Vietnam, haven't noticed. It's odd, isn't it? Maybe Mark Steyn can explain. He's an author and columnist, and of course a friend of the show, and he joins us now. So I wonder, Mark, as these august legal scholars lecture us from their perches on cable television about how the Constitution requires John Brennan to have a security clearance, and if he doesn't, our First Amendment rights are being violated, do they notice that people's freedom of expression is being violated every day in real ways across the country by the tech titans? Do you think that even computes, or they're taking too much money from Google to care?
No, you're right. You're right. There's a contradiction there, and the left's position seems to be, which is amazing, actually, when you think back 15 years when they were all going bananas because George W. Bush was supposedly trying to find out what library books you were reading. They're apparently now cool with spooks having super First Amendment privileges. Now, I'm actually with Senator Blumenthal. I think we might as well have a constitutional right to a security clearance because about 3 or 4 years ago, just under 5 million people in this country had security clearances, which is more than the population of New Zealand or Norway. And that's one of the reasons for the dysfunction of the intelligence community. I think it's now down to about 4.5 million with security clearances. But at that level, actually, everybody might as well have security clearances. So I'm with Senator Blumenthal. Security clearances for, in fact, in an effort at bipartisan compromise, I think that as unaccompanied minors are coming across the Rio Grande in a skiff, that ICE should hand them their security clearances. So, Senator Blumenthal, go for it.
I like that idea. And it's probably going to come true. But the irony, again, there are so many layers of it, but that these are the exact same people who are telling us that we don't have a right to know what our government is doing. We don't have a right to know the pretext under which Carter Page was spied upon by the Obama administration. And we're, by the way, Quislings if we ask too many questions. But somehow John Brennan has a right to read classified information. I mean, how could you make that argument without turning red with shame by his dumbness?
It's, in actual fact, if you read John Brennan's column in the New York Times, it's actually faintly creepy because at one point, he actually says at one point, I want to make sure I get this right, that a variety of politicians, political parties, media outlets, think tanks, and influencers, that means you, Tucker, you're an influencer, you're readily manipulated wittingly and unwittingly by Russian intelligence. So you, Tucker, you don't even know you're being manipulated by Russian intelligence. But the fact that you're objecting to John Brennan telling you you're being manipulated by Russian intelligence is the clearest proof that you're being manipulated by Russian intelligence. This is all this guy's got. And this is why, if he wants to be this idiotic in public, if he wants to be just another obscure MSNBC pundit, he should do it without a security clearance. And one other thing, Tucker, when they say, oh, this is the action of dictatorships, you can say a lot of things about dictatorships. But one of the things that you can say with certainty is when the dictator removes you as head of the intelligence security apparatus, actually you lose your security clearance in not only in dictatorships, in dictatorships, in almost all other countries, this idea of ex officio security clearance, it's bad enough. You know, one of the ridiculous things about this country is because you don't have viscounts and dukes. Somebody who was a senator from 1972 to 1978 gets called senator until the day he dies. And now we're saying that aside from that, he should also have a security clearance until the day he dies. Ex officio security clearances are a stupid idea, and they should be abolished across the board.
In real dictatorships, former intel heads wind up like Beria. So, I mean, it's also so stupid. Mark, thank you. Great to see you, as always. Ethan Merriman is a radio show host. Thank you. In California, Ethan joins us tonight. So, Ethan, I didn't go to Yale Law School, couldn't get in. But where in the Constitution does it say that former spies are required to keep their security clearances?
The issue here, Tucker, is if the government wants to impede on your ability to express yourself, which we have two separate issues happening here. We have the attacks on the free press that are happening, the enemy of the people. And then separately, if I revoke your security clearance because I don't like what you're saying, which is what's going on right now, that is an attempt to silence you in your criticism of me if I was John Brennan.
Well, hold on. But how is it? Hold on. Well, let's start to first principles here. What national interest is served by giving MSNBC contributors top secret security clearances? How does that help?
So for the
point of all of this is to help the country.
At least 6 administrations, maybe it's 5, have retained those security clearances after they've left office, because the current sitting CIA director, for example, may want to refer to the previous CIA director for information about an operation, some inside scoop on why they were doing something or what they were doing. And instead of having to go through a security clearance every single time that they wanted to have a conversation about it, you kept the security clearance in place.
I understand how the system, the system has worked, but we're not talking about the system, we're talking about John Brennan. So how does America benefit by John Brennan having a security clearance? I'm completely confused.
If the sitting CIA director wants to confer with him about, for example, hey, what led you to investigate the Russians that were visiting the RNC or going to Trump Tower? What was behind your thinking on that? What was the information that led you to hand that over to somebody else?
He doesn't need a security clearance.
Where were you on this?
He doesn't. Hold on. Whoa, hold on. You don't need John Brennan to have a security clearance. No, that's not true. John Brennan does not need a security clearance in order to answer straightforward questions from someone in government. People are subpoenaed all the time. People speak voluntarily all the time to government without security clearances. So I don't understand.
No, for the private conversation.
You know the truth. No, there's no... John Brennan can answer any question he chooses to answer. He doesn't need a clearance. And I'm just wondering, the truth is, this is insane. There's no scenario that you could create where we need to give John Brennan a security clearance. That's a privilege that he has. It's tradition that we have. It may or may not be justifiable, but it's not his right. I mean, that's insane. He's an unelected bureaucrat who now works as a contributor on a cable news channel. Just like you, just like me. We don't deserve security clearances, do we?
No, we don't deserve it. And what's interesting, though, again, is there are two separate issues that are coming together here. One are the daily attacks on the press. We are the enemy of the people, except for you and some others here, but most of the press is considered the enemy of the people. And now that Brennan is on one of the less favored networks, he's an enemy of the people, and therefore one of the ways to silence him is to very publicly revoke his security clearance.
How does that silence? What do you mean? Why does he have it in? Look. It's a measure of the depth of the corruption that he would have a security clearance in the first place. There's no scenario where the rest of us benefit from that. It's another stupid Washington tradition. I can tell you, having lived there all my life, there are many of them. And this is one, and it came to light because this show brought it to light, and it's totally indefensible. So rather than defend it, they're just like, oh, Richard Blumenthal says you have a constitutional right. It's illegal to take away his security clearance. How is that true? Exactly.
Well, actually, there's an argument for that. So in administrative law, at least, Tucker, to take away somebody's livelihood, so in this case, maybe his security clearance could be argued that is the source of his livelihood. I mean, why is he at MSNBC, for example? I mean, because he was CIA
that tells you right
because
there.
He had security clearance.
Oh, I get it. So you're conceding that he's using this. Wait, hold on. What you're saying is that John Brennan is viewing top secret information and using that in his role as an MSNBC contributor. Well, what else are you saying?
I'm saying that
if that's like central to his livelihood. Well, no, John Brennan shouldn't be using top secret information to which he has special access in his role as a cable news pundit. No?
I'm not suggesting that he's using that to view classified information. That is a credential. That is a credential that gives you a job.
It's meaningless unless you can exercise it.
No, and that's not even why you retain that privilege is so the CIA director has information that is new, for example, since your operation when you were CIA director, to have the conversation about the continuance of the operation. But
you can have that conversation. You can ask John Brennan whatever you want. He doesn't need a clearance for that. This is a window into how totally corrupt our system is. It's totally corrupt, and the people benefiting from it have no self-awareness at all. Oh, you're violating my constitutional rights. Ugh. Ethan Sachs is spinning me up. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
I want to bring you a Fox News alert tonight. The Pentagon has announced a delay, they say, to President Trump's planned military parade. The parade was originally scheduled to take place November 10th, the day before Veterans Day. It has been pushed back to sometime in 2019. The overall cost, which is inspired by a similar parade in France, expected to be $80 million in that ballpark. Obviously, we'll continue to follow this story as it develops. Up next, a Mexican restaurant owner in Texas is being targeted because he dared serve dinner to the Attorney General. He is Hispanic, and so Univision says he should not be allowed to do that. One of its anchors joins us next to explain how that works. Well, the left claims to love Hispanics, but that love seems to evaporate very quickly if individuals take the wrong approach on politics. Here's one example. Houston restaurant owner Dominic Lorenzo recently took a photograph with the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. He said he was proud to host Sessions at his restaurant, which is called El Tiempo Cantina. Lorenzo didn't endorse Sessions' politics. He just said he was happy to serve a prominent American. But that was too far. Now the restaurant is being barraged with calls for a boycott, and Spanish-language channel Univision is leading the attack. Enrique Acevedo is an anchor over at Univision, and he joins us tonight. Enrique, thanks a lot for coming on.
Of course, always a pleasure.
I misread this whole thing. I thought you guys were a news network. I didn't know that you were enforcers of ethnic solidarity, but you are. So your job is to make certain that if a Hispanic in America steps out of line, that you pummel him and make sure he gets back into the herd. Is that how you see your job as a journalist?
Not at all, and I'm not sure if you're referring to a specific news report or something you saw on one of our newscasts, but I have no recollection of us doing anything like that, Tucker.
Our mutual friend, Jorge Ramos, is calling, in effect, for this restaurant owner to be punished because Hispanics are not allowed to eat with Jeff Sessions. And I was just wondering, I thought in 2018, regardless of your race, you could eat with anyone you wanted. But that's not true, I guess, right? According to Univision?
That's not what Jorge said. And, you know, I'm not surprised this is happening.
Oh.
This is what a divided America looks like. It's a result of the trickle-down incivility that starts with the president calling women dogs and immigrants animals, journalists enemies of the people, and then it spreads everywhere through the kind of incendiary rhetoric we hear from you or Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham.
So you're saying that Donald Trump is controlling Jorge Ramos's brain? Does Jorge know that?
Of course, Donald Trump doesn't control, I don't think, anyone's brain. Sometimes
but you just said that it was Trump's fault that Jorge is calling for a boycott.
I have to say, but to be honest, you know, I think this is what we get when we start, you know, with the hate, the division, with the lack of context, with the resistance to facts that we see in our politics, and that it's also spreading to a larger contingent of what we call the media.
So you guys are joining in, I guess so. But did you think when you joined Univision that part of your job would be to attack disobedient Hispanics? Was that in the contract, or is that just like something you discovered when you started working there?
Of course, that's not something that we do at Univision, and you know Jorge very well. You know that.
No, it's
he would
something
never
you're
say
doing
or do
right
anything
now.
like that either.
Oh, no. That's literally exactly what he's doing. He's saying this man is Hispanic, therefore he has no right to say anything nice about the Attorney General of the United States. If this guy was African American or Asian or white, it wouldn't be a big deal, but he's Hispanic, therefore he's not allowed to, because Univision decides what Hispanics are allowed to do. That's kind of a weird position for a news network, don't you think?
There's something to be said about Jeff Sessions, about a man and the moral contradictions of a man that has opposed every effort to reform our broken immigration system in the last 2 decades, that has led the charge to dehumanize and criminalize immigrants, their story, their culture, and then suddenly shows up at a Mexican restaurant to order huevos rancheros. That's like Cuban officials going to a McDonald's to order a Big Mac after a speech on American imperialism.
Wait a second. Was the owner?
This doesn't fly.
Was the owner an immigrant? Wait, hold on. Was the owner an immigrant? I thought he was an American.
I don't think that makes a difference. There are a lot of immigrants that are American citizens, so it's pretty much.
Hold on. Slow down. Hold on. So you're saying if you have a Hispanic last name that you must be an immigrant? Is that what you're saying? I mean, that's not an assumption I make. There are lots of Americans with Hispanic last names. I grew up next to a bunch of them. Okay,
so I mean, like I said, there are a lot of immigrants that are American citizens, so that's a peculiar distinction.
I'm aware, but so he's an American. I mean, I'm assuming he is. I hope he is. I hope everyone here is an American. So he's having a meal with the Attorney General of his country, but he's not allowed to because why? Just speak slowly so I can understand this.
I didn't say he's not allowed. Of course he's allowed. And I think every restaurant should serve their clients. And we shouldn't, you know, I'm one of those people who doesn't believe in public shaming and in, you know, this type of behavior when we see a public official. It doesn't matter if you don't agree with his politics or with the administration that he works for. I actually think that we should all be for civility. But this is what a divided America looks like. This is what, I'm sorry to say, shows like yours or Sean Hannity's are feeding.
Right. So, okay, I'm feeding it, right. This is a confusing time, 2018. Who knows what the boundaries are? I'm totally opposed to illegal immigration. I think that our legal immigration level should be lower because the country's getting too volatile. Those are my sincere views. I also like Mexican food since I grew up on the Mexican border. Should I be allowed to eat Mexican food?
No, no. You know, this is, I think, what people are pointing out, the contradiction of attacking someone's culture, someone's story, and then celebrating their food and celebrating
what do you mean their food? It's American
what they find
food.
convenient to celebrate about their story.
What, you think you own tacos now or something? I love this. It's so crazy.
No one does, by the way.
Oh, really? Because it sounds like you feel like you own tacos. No. I feel like I do. I feel like they're an American food, and I'm going to keep eating them, even though I agree with Jeff Sessions.
I'm glad you do. No, and I think everyone should. Tacos, guacamole, and, you know, we should all celebrate each other's cultures. We feed off each other. It's what makes us
each other's cultures. No. It's an American
diverse
food.
and stronger.
It's an American
feeding
food.
off each other's cultures, borrowing from each other's cultures, learning from each other's cultures.
I'm from San Diego, man. Those are my tacos. Mine.
Right.
Anyway, thank you. Great to see you.
Great to see you, too.
Democrats in Minnesota outdid themselves this week. They nominated an alleged domestic abuser to be attorney general, while a congressional candidate has been accused of marrying her own brother in a bizarre immigration scam. You can't make this up. We're not going to, but we have the details for you after the break. Democrats in Minnesota held their primary elections this Tuesday and outdid themselves. They chose the best and the brightest in the state to contend for high office in November. Among them, DNC Vice Chairman Keith Ellison. He won his primary race for the Attorney General of the state. Amazingly, he was just hit, though, with allegations of domestic abuse, violence against an ex-girlfriend who herself is a liberal activist. Interesting, but it gets weirder than that. A woman called Ilhan Omar won the Democratic primary to replace Ellison in the 5th Congressional District of Minnesota. She has been accused of executing a bizarre immigration fraud involving a marriage to her own brother. We don't make this up, we merely report it. Scott Johnson is a lawyer in Minnesota, founder of the blog Powerline, and a very keen observer of politics in the state. He joins us tonight. Scott, first to the Ellison story. Just to be clear, this is not a conventional Me Too thing. This is an allegation of violence, correct?
Correct. But the charges just were made public on Saturday evening, and they are still reverberating. As of this afternoon, the Democrats were asking Keith Ellison to answer questions, which he has so far refused to do.
Not all allegations are true, of course, and I think it's always important to remember that. How credible are these allegations?
Well, from what I've looked at, I think that they are quite credible. They were originally made by the lady's son on a Facebook post, and they cause people to take a look back at the lady's tweets over the period of time that she was dating Ellison, and she alludes to being the subject of abuse in a Me Too kind of fashion without naming the perpetrator. But in fact, she was dating Ellison at the time. There are photographs of the two of them together, and I think the allegations, it's fair to say, he should not be presumed guilty, but they are serious.
I mean, Al Franken was forced out of the Senate for something far less than this. It'll be interesting to see. So tell us about the woman who was just nominated to replace him in the 5th Congressional District, married her brother? Can that be right?
Well, I'm still asking myself that question. I got a tip 2 years ago that, in fact, Ilhan Omar was married to 2 guys, and that her brother was husband number 2. And so far as I was able to check it out at the time, it seemed to check out, and I asked her campaign to comment on what I had found, and they sent me back an email from a criminal defense attorney refusing to respond to the allegations and calling me a bigot. Well, after I wrote about it on Powerline, a local reporter for a small online publication called Alpha News, Priya Samsunder, followed up on what I had written, and Priya found all kinds of social media evidence supporting the evidence that husband number 2 was in fact her brother. And as Ilhan explained at the time, she had never legally married husband number 1, who she has always held out as her husband and the father of her children, and explained that she married husband number 2 for a short period of time, 8 years later, but has refused to answer any questions about him in the 2 years since we've been writing about it.
You think of Minnesota as such a straight-laced state. I guess we need to revise our view of it. Scott Johnson, thank you very much. Really an expert on that subject, for sure. Thanks.
I appreciate your interest, Tucker. Thank you.
Drug ODs reached a record high this year. We got the new numbers. Congress's priority naturally is to release thousands of convicted drug dealers back into the streets. We're not making that up either. We've got details next. People in politics lie a lot. You probably knew that. It's hardly news. What's more interesting is when they say what they really think, and they do sometimes. Chelsea Clinton did the other day. She was at an event protesting Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Clinton explained that Roe v. Wade has been indispensable to the American economy. She even put a number on it, suggesting she's thought a lot about it. The 60 million abortions committed in this country since 1973, she said, have added $3.5 trillion to America's GDP. Fewer women doing dumb things like bringing new life into the world. More women doing the vital business of faithfully serving global capitalism. Earning, consuming, just like Amazon wants. Motherhood does not turn a profit, so get back to your drone work, ladies. Private equity is counting on you. That's the America Chelsea Clinton likes to see. She must be secretly grateful to the Speaker of the House, by the way. Despite promising to stop taxpayer funding of Planned Parenthood in 2016, Paul Ryan has not even really tried to do that. In the meantime, Planned Parenthood has performed another 600,000 abortions. By Chelsea Clinton's math, Ryan helped add more than $35 billion to the economy. Congratulations, Paul Ryan. Shareholders are thrilled by that. Amazon thanks you. America is in the grip of the worst drug crisis in its history, as you know. Each year, overdoses kill more Americans than died during the entire Vietnam War. The numbers are up this year. They just came out over 70,000. You'd think everybody manipulating the levers of power in Washington would be concerned/panicked about this. You think Congress would be eager to do something to fix it. But instead they have a very different agenda, one that works at cross purposes, getting softer on drug dealers. A bipartisan bill making its way through the Senate right now would drastically cut minimum sentences for cocaine and heroin smugglers. Why? Well, Tom Cotton may have an answer. He is a Republican senator from Arkansas, and he joins us tonight. Senator, this seems an odd time to reduce the sentences for drug dealers, and you've got 70,000 Americans dying of drug ODs. What is going on?
It's a very odd time, Tucker. As you say, just last year, 72,000 Americans were killed from drug overdoses, which is a new record. Unfortunately, it beat the record from the previous year. If anything, we should be cracking down on drug dealers. I've got legislation that would increase mandatory minimums for fentanyl, which is a very dangerous synthetic opioid that is made oftentimes in China and smuggled through Mexico. It would also overturn a Supreme Court decision from just 3 years ago that let many violent felons back onto the streets, armed career criminals. Yet instead, we're moving forward with legislation that may drastically cut mandatory minimums and give liberal judges more discretion to deviate even further from those mandatory minimums. It's very disappointing. We shouldn't be focused on reducing sentences. We should be focused on prison reform if you want to focus on criminal justice at all. You know, everyone in prison is there for a reason. There's a good chance they're going to commit future crimes if they don't get, say, a skill or education or get drug treatment. That's fine. But prison reform is very different from sentencing reductions.
If you were going to reduce sentences for criminals, you'd think maybe you'd focus on marijuana users in jail or low-level drug users. Why would you reduce the sentences for large-volume drug traffickers in the middle of the worst drug epidemic in our history? It doesn't make sense. Who's pushing this?
Yeah, so Tucker, the reason why you have to focus on large-scale drug traffickers in the federal prison system is that's really all that's in the federal prison system. Virtually no one goes to federal prison as a low-level, non-violent offender. Just a few hundred people at most. But in those cases, they usually pleaded down from a more serious offense. Now, I can't speak to what every state does in terms of its drug sentencing. Even at the state level, it's pretty rare, though. But at the federal level, if you are in federal prison, you are a repeat offender or you are a serious offender, trafficking in huge quantities of drugs. Yet if you're in the Congress, that's the only system you control. And if you're ideologically committed to having lower drug sentences, that means lower sentences at the federal level for serious traffickers.
Very quickly, Senator, are you worried our crime rate's going to go up?
I am worried, Tucker, that the crime rate is going up. Mandatory minimum sentences and 3 strikes laws and taking discretion away from liberal judges over the last 30 years has led to a remarkable decline in crime in this country. However, we started to see some increases in crime in the last 2 years of the Obama administration, and it just stands to reason when most prisoners, when released from prison, commit future crimes, that if we let more prisoners out or shorten their sentences, you're going to see an increase in crime in this country.
Yeah, it's not complicated. Senator, thank you, but apparently your colleagues need convincing, so thank you for your work on that. Appreciate it.